everybody. Can everyone hear okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So welcome back. It feels like it's been ages since we had our last group. So yeah, today we're joined by Dr. Haigh. Anna, who is a psychologist at Axia. Some of you may have met her before. If you haven't, then you will in a minute. Anna, could you just pop onto the next slide, please? Just to go through the housekeeping. Same as usual, you all know what the chat is, but the session is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to our website in the next few days. As usual, names and faces and things will be removed, and we'll avoid using your names if we do read out any questions from the chat box. With that, yeah, feel free to use the chat box either to have conversations amongst yourselves, or if you have any questions, points, anything that you'd like us to share with the group and share with Anna, then you can use it for that as well. You can also use your microphone if you'd rather speak and ask your question that way. If you do want to do that, if you use the raise hand function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, that will then bump you to the top of our list, and we can then unmute you and you can ask your question that way.
Okay, great. So I think we'll make a start. We've got quite a few of you in, but then if more people join, we'll just add them in and we'll carry on like that. So yeah, Anna, if you're ready.
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Disclaimer before we start, both of my children who are quite young have got some form of horrible norovirus. So if you hear wailing in the background, I promise I'm not doing anything awful to them. They're just not very well. So you might hear lots of sounds of daddy, but they're fine and they're being looked after. So my name is Anna. I've got a long title. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and I specialise in mental health. So my job is slightly unusual in that I don't actually work face-to-face with patients anymore. I did for a long time. I don't now. I work with staff and the person who's accessing the service to work out when there's a problem occurs. So if somebody is coming to us for treatment, it's not working, something's going wrong, there's some difficult dynamics, then it's my job to come into that situation and to support the staff to think about what might be happening, and that's thinking about themselves as well as the person, to support the system to think about what we might be missing. So that's managers, GPs, primary health nurses, lots of different people. I work on the acute ward, so if people have to go into hospital, I work there, and I cover quite a large patch. So I work for Tees, Esk and Wear Valleys, and I cover all the way up the A1 and to the left, basically, so the Yorkshire Dales. So I'm a bit like the Yorkshire vets, but for mental health. That is my job. So I'm here today because my other hat is that I'm a diagnostician for Axia. I come from a very neurodivergent family, and I have grown up my whole life with differences and seen that as a massive strength in the people I share my life with. So I kind of have two hats, a kind of neurodivergence and a mental health hat. So I thought it might be useful to come today to talk about how you navigate mental health services. Now, the issues in navigating services are not just for people who are neurodivergent. There's issues right across the board, and we know that mental health services are struggling. They have been for a long time, but there are specific issues that come up for neurodivergent people, and that's what I'll be talking about today. It's going to be really boring if you just listen to me. Much as I don't mind speaking, I think it will get quite dull. So you can stop me at any time. I really don't mind. You can ask me questions. You can put questions in the chat. That is absolutely fine, and I welcome that. I'm here to have a conversation. I've done a few slides. I'll rattle through those fairly fast. I'll pause a bit, but if you have any questions or anything you want to ask, you can ask me at the time, or we will have a discussion after this. So once I've finished the presentation, we can come together and have a little bit of a think. I'd be really interested in your reaction about what I've said today. So let's start with take care. Now, this is not patronizing. I really mean it. I do this for everybody I ever speak to about this stuff. Sometimes talking about mental health brings up things that we weren't expecting. So even if you're on top of your mental health and things are pretty good, talking about the frustration of accessing services or talking about mental health experiences can bring that stuff back up. So can happen in the session, might happen afterwards. So if that happens, you can just leave. I won't take offense, take a break, come back in. That's absolutely fine. Please look after yourselves. And just be careful what you share, because when a discussion gets going, it's really easy to start to contribute, but then actually later thinking, oh, did I want people to know about that? Did I want that personal experience out there? So just monitor what it is that you're sharing and check before you share it. Am I happy for everybody to know this? And yeah, ask me any questions you like. As the family member of neurodivergent people, that includes dyspraxia, ADHD and autism. You can ask me as a clinical psychologist in a mental health system, but also as someone who's worked with people with learning disabilities, with people who are autistic, with lots of different people. So you can ask me whatever you need to. So this is a disclaimer, putting my disclaimer in there. And this presentation comes from my experience. This is my perspective. Now, I might say things that other mental health practitioners would shudder at. And this is my take on what is going on in the system, but it's just one take. So it's not reflective of all services. And I'm going to make some generalizations as we go along about what things people who are neurodivergent can encounter in mental health services. Again, that's not going to reflect everybody's experience. So I'll do my best, but yeah, there will be some bits that don't fit. I'm going to include information from different sources. So the NICE guidelines, there has been a recent paper, the Good Practice Guide for Professionals Delivering Talking Therapies for Autistic Adults and Children, snappy title, and their Autism Act as well, because all of those things have a kind of an impact on services. And at the end, I'm going to talk about some of the developments in mental health services. This is the most revolutionary time that we've ever known, probably, in mental health services. So it would be really good for you to know about what's going on. Because interestingly, even though it's so radical, a lot of people don't actually know what's happening at all. So why is it important to talk about access to mental health services? I'm really sorry if these statistics are a bit depressing in themselves, but I think it's important to highlight the fact that people who are neurodivergent, autistic people, do tend to access services more than your neurotypical people. Now, we can hypothesize about why that is. Being a person who lives in a neurotypical world that is designed for neurotypical people is stressful and difficult. Sensory issues are stressful and difficult, and that will increase the likelihood of people becoming anxious, and that can then increase the likelihood of people becoming depressed. So there's lots of other factors as well. There's all sorts of inequalities in our society. There's lots of stuff in the world around us that would make it more likely for you to be anxious or depressed if you're a neurodivergent person. So 76% of autistic people have tried to access mental health services in the past 5 years. I'd be really interested how many of them were successful. And 70% of autistic children have some sort of mental health problem. And 94% of autistic people that were surveyed said they experienced anxiety. That's almost everybody. So some level of anxiety is really, really common right across the board. And again, 83% then report actual clinical depression. So you can see this is a really big issue. Now, whether or not this is echoed in mental health services, I think arguably it's not, personally. I think that the fact that this group of people, you guys, need services so much, I don't think that up until very recently that's been thought about carefully enough. And I think that mental health services have not been tailored to meet the needs of this group of people. So why? What's the problem? This is my perspective. I'd be really interested in other people's perspectives. People who've worked in the system. Linda, I can see you're here. I'd be interested if you share this perspective. I find in mental health services, people are often misdiagnosed. So it is possible to qualify as a clinical psychologist. It's possible, terrifyingly, to qualify as a psychiatrist and actually never have specialised or potentially knowingly even met somebody on the autism spectrum. I think that's a very serious problem. Now, the reason for that is that in the way that services were divided up until quite recently, where mental health services were one section, they were standalone, they were over here, and they were mental health services. And often autism, quite wrongly, came under learning disability services. Now, Linda, I'd be interested if you agree with that, if that was your experience. Yeah, she's nodding, yeah. So autism then was something that people who worked with people with learning disabilities knew about. So if you went into any learning disability team, the expertise and the knowledge around autism would probably be reasonable, maybe not always brilliant, but reasonable. Mental health services, however, were seen as different. They were seen as for the neurotypical population, because if you're autistic, well, you go to the learning disability service. Now, obviously, that is absolute and blatant discrimination. So that stopped. It had to stop. And there was a whole change in how services were structured, and the green light policy, which meant that autistic people could access mental health services. Now, the problem with that is that training hasn't changed. So I don't believe personally that the majority of mental health staff have the core training to be able to work with people who are neurodivergent. So as a mental health nurse, many of the mental health nurses I work with say to me, I am desperate to give a service to this person. I have no idea what I'm doing, Anna. I don't know what I'm doing, and I want to. It's not a lack of will. It is genuinely, we never covered this. We never learned this. I don't know what I'm doing. Now, that is obviously going to have an impact on people's experiences of accessing services, because if the staff that you're working with don't understand autism, neurodivergence in general, then they're not going to have an intrinsic knowledge of how to adapt what they normally do for the autistic population. On top of that, anyone who has tried to access mental health services will have encountered the waiting lists. We've got huge waiting lists at the moment. At the bottom, I've put that diagnosis can also be astronomical in some areas. I heard somebody tell me the other day it was 7 years. I mean, can you imagine 7 years on a waiting list? I mean, it's become ridiculous. And that can be a problem as well, because if you don't have a formal diagnosis of autism, then the mental health services don't necessarily know that you're autistic, and they won't necessarily make the reasonable adjustments. So again, people end up misdiagnosed. In practice, what I see most often is that women often come to me with a diagnosis of emotionally unstable personality disorder, and men often come with a diagnosis of OCD and anxiety. That's just clinically what I see. I don't know what the research suggests, but that's what I see all the time. And then I meet that person and go, I don't think it's that at all. This person is an autistic person, and everyone goes, really? And I go, well, yes, of course they are. And it comes as such news to the team often, which really makes me think, again, it's not malicious, but it genuinely doesn't go through their minds that is what this might be. So they come at it from a mental health perspective and give a mental health diagnosis. The reason that's a problem is that treatments are not always effective for autistic people unless they're adapted. So your standard CBT is usually massively, densely full of metaphor, of social imagination, of imagining the future, of imagining what is in someone else's mind. If you're an autistic person and that's not your skill, it's going to go right over your head. And then you get the label treatment resistant, which basically means we've done this badly. But that can end up on people's notes, their treatment resistance. The other issue is that medication, I'll come on to this later, psychotropic medication, which is what we call medication for mental health, can be experienced differently by neurodivergent people. So if you've already got sensory sensitivities, if you're very sensitive to what's happening in your body, if you already are hypersensitive, say, to touch, and then you have an experience with a medication that makes your skin feel like it's crawling, that's intolerable. So whereas a neurotypical brain might say, oh, that's probably the meds, and almost turn down that experience, so ignore it a little bit, a neurodivergent brain cannot do that in the same way, and so might turn it up and experience it as even more powerful, or at least experience it as intolerable. And we know that often people come back to us and say, these medications are intolerable to us, I can't take this. And guess what gets written on their notes? Treatment resistant. Now, that is an unhelpful phrase, and it's one that I constantly rail against in the mental health teams. We don't use it anymore, but that has definitely happened in the past. Does anyone want to comment? This is a brief overview. Does anyone want to come in with anything now? Because you're more than welcome to. So something's in the chat. So the longer I find myself living in my own rhythm, the better I feel. The more a structure which isn't mine is being enforced on me, the more anxious I feel. Yep. The innate sense of agency gets crushed. Absolutely. I feel best when I can really have my own rhythm and daily structure. It is that rather rigid perspective by current authorities that is causing stress. On my own, I'm not feeling anxious. Yeah, what a fabulous reflection. This is something I come across a lot. It's called iatrogenic harm. And that is the harm that is specifically caused by services. So someone comes into our service seeking help, and because of the way that we're structured, because of the issues that we face, because we're often risk averse, iatrogenic harm. I think that's how you spell it. My spelling is not the best in the world, but if you Google that, you'll get something similar. So that is the harm that we do, and we know about it. We know that we do it. We try really hard not to, but I'll come to you in a second. That last comment, I'll come to that in a second, because yes, that's a very helpful term. I'll describe that in a minute. The harm that we do can often make things worse. So you start a cycle, you come in and you're anxious, and then mental health services can't help you, or they don't help you, or they put you on a waiting list, or they try and make you do something you can't do. So then you feel more anxious. And then you start to think, well, if the mental health team can't help me, I'm hopeless, that, you know, what's going to happen to me? And then you get depressed, and then you come to us for depression. And again, we can go around that cycle. So in some ways, by getting it wrong, not on purpose, by getting it wrong, we can make situations worse. Someone's put, does treatment resistant mean someone has deliberately resisted it? I thought it meant it just hasn't worked. No, it doesn't mean that someone's deliberately resisted it, but it means that the treatment hasn't worked. Now, that is a big assumption to make if you haven't adapted it. Because if someone has treatment resistant, that means, oh, we've tried this, we've tried that, we've tried the other, it hasn't worked. Actually, if you've tried it in a neurotypical way and it hasn't worked, that doesn't mean that the issue is treatment resistant. It means that the treatment that you have given them hasn't been adapted properly. So it doesn't even mean that the treatment hasn't worked. It just means you haven't done it right for that person. So that's why I have a problem with that term, because it kind of puts the issue into the person, like this is a treatment resistant, we can't do something about this. Whereas actually the issue is often in the delivery of the service. It's not treatment resistant anxiety, it's anxiety that we haven't treated in the way it needs to be treated yet. So slight shift in perspective, but one that I think is quite important. Right, let me click on. So getting a referral, how do you get a referral to mental health services? So normally it's through your GP. Increasingly, and this will increase more over the next 3 years, there are other services that are operating in your area that might be preferable for you in terms of treatment. So there are increasingly what we call third sector charity organisations that are offering psychological therapy that don't have the same waiting lists and that do have expertise in this area. So it's always worth checking what else is going on. Like I think in our country, we're very much straight to the NHS, which might be absolutely appropriate for you. That might be the route. However, if you think what I need is to talk about this specific issue, or there's this issue in my life, there are other agencies. So for some examples, if you're struggling with relationships and actually you feel like you're in an abusive relationship, Women's Aid, who do also see men, that's not specifically about women, but Women's Aid will often be the right place for you to go. If you've experienced trauma in your life, there are often projects around that are better at doing that sort of therapy. So it doesn't always have to be the NHS, and it's worth just looking around. If there isn't anything that you found that would suit you, then go to your GP and they will either refer you for psychological therapy. So that's what we call primary care. That is a first therapy for you, or they will refer you to the community mental health team, usually depending on how worried about you they are. That usually is the decision. Now, that's not to say how severe your mental health problem is. So even if you've got a very significant mental health problem, you might still be seen in primary care. It's how worried are we that you might end your life, if I'm being totally honest. That is what often is the difference between primary and secondary care. I can see someone typing. I'm just going to pause because I'm wondering if there might be questions about that. You're absolutely fine if anyone's got some questions about this, because that is not... yeah, here we go. Treatment to me is a bit triggering per se, as this means something is wrong with you that needs to be fixed. Is it really? Again, I found my own solutions that work well for me. They might be unorthodox, but I'm doing well, so I don't feel I need treatment. Yeah, that's a very good question. Depends what we're talking about. And I guess within a mental health system, we are talking about mental illness. Now that's triggering. It's triggering for me too. Illness. Wouldn't anybody who was navigating a world that is so hostile to neurodivergent people feel anxious? Yes, would be my answer. But this is the language of mental health services. And it is because they are there to work with people who are experiencing what they would see as a mental illness. Now, whether you call that a mental illness is a different conversation. And I think, interestingly, that is where the conversation is going in general, particularly in psychology. And again, Linda, I'm sure you've been part of these conversations that we're starting to resist the idea of diagnosis. And we're starting to ask people what happened to you, not what is wrong with you. But at the moment, this is still the language of mental health services. So if you go to your GP, they will still talk about treatment. Now, that's not to say that the person that you see is going to think like that. We often are quite clear why somebody's feeling anxious or depressed, or you know, they have bipolar, or they have some other, you know, what we would call a mental health issue, that you know, that is often completely and utterly obvious from their situation why they would feel in that way. But yes, this is the language of mental health services. Someone's put, to be referred to community mental care can be dangerous because you are then in the hands of people who don't understand autism. I agree. Yes, I would agree with you. And that goes back to my initial slide, which is, if you are not diagnosed, or even if you are, but they don't understand what that means, your behavior can be misinterpreted. So then you start to get into the realms of, this person has a personality disorder, this person is anxious, this person is whatever, angry. I get lots of letters to say, please help us with this angry man. I'm like, why is this man angry? Because that would be really useful to think about. Someone's put, all my past experiences with mental health services has been damaging, but it was pre-diagnosis. Yep. Having to speak about myself makes me very distressed and semi-non-verbal. Being able to type is better. Yes, that's a really good example. So some services now, like I was saying about some community services, are offering purely typed therapy. So there is a young person's project called Kooth, Kooth. Sadly, they only see young people at the moment, but they offer purely typed online therapy. And for my autistic young people that I see, that is proving to be amazing. Often I will work with teams to think about how we can offer this. Now, the twitchiness about this has often come from data protection. So in the past, the NHS has been very resistant to things like using email, using text, any of those things, because they're terrified about being sued. There's a reality to that. We are endlessly sued. So just being plain devil's advocate, being on the other side, it is very common for there to be complaints. It is very common for data breaches to end up in, you know, really significant kind of sums of money that mental health trusts have to pay out. So this is why they're twitchy in a way that charities aren't often, but that is changing. So someone's put, Helen, exactly. Oh my God, it's like speaking to a wall. It doesn't get through to them. Yes, that's true. And if you haven't had any training in autism, but you are supposed to be proficient and able to offer mental health services to somebody who is autistic, one way of dealing with that is to become defensive. And I think you probably have engaged with a lot of defensive practitioners, I imagine, over the years, because they don't know what they're doing. And it's very tricky. Yes, you can send anything by email. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's fine. Right, I'm going to come out of the chat for a minute and move on. So what things should mental health services provide as standard? So this is across the board. Anybody accessing a mental health service with a diagnosis that is covered under the Equality Act should be given reasonable adjustments. That is a legal requirement. They have to do it. So if they are huffing and puffing and rolling their eyes about your request to use email, you can remind them that this is a legal requirement. They have to do this. All staff should now have received training about autism and how to make reasonable adjustments. So there is a program that's been rolled out nationwide, certainly has in our trust, which is to what I would call awareness level. I would say that my staff, that's rude, isn't it? They're not my staff at all, but staff I work with, I think they have an awareness now of autism that they didn't have before. And I think they have an awareness of when to ask for help. What I think we still lack is that on the ground, every day, what to do, how to adjust things, how to genuinely make services meaningful for autistic people. I think we still really struggle with that. That is getting better. Many services now have a specific team to deliver this and to offer consultation, but they're absolutely swamped. Just as an example, it's a bit of a depressing example, but I'll share it. I started last September as a consultant in personality disorder mainly. That is my role. My role is mainly around relational dynamics that come up within the context of personality disorder. That's where the money that pays for my post comes from. In the year between September and September, I saw 2 people that I would say, or were involved in 2 cases I would say were neurotypical, and every other single person that I was involved in their care was neurodivergent in some way. So we've got a problem, and we do have a neurodivergent team to offer that consultation, but they are drowning. And so everything's coming through to me or being misdiagnosed as emotional unstable personality disorder, and therefore I get brought in. So that's very worrying when almost entirely the whole of my caseload are autistic people. That tells me that there's a real problem here. I'm very aware, I've been practicing survival strategies for decades. I'm just reading, so I'm reading a quote here. It has basically kept me on the rails, but it renders me so risk averse that I have no social life. Yes, I would absolutely, echo that. And I think that's what happens when you can't get meaningful support. You have to find your own strategies. And for some people that really works. And in some of the comments before, actually people are saying this system doesn't work for me. I found my own way, and that works brilliantly. For some people it works, but it comes at the cost of being able to engage in a social life, go out, take risks, because you know that if you get unsteady, unsettled, there isn't the support around you. So you've almost got to maintain a very tight grip on your mental health, and that can be limiting to people's well-being. Is this proving helpful so far? Nod or shake if it is not. Yes, that's a thumbs up. Good, that's good. Okay, good, right, good. If I start getting boring, just put in the chat, stop. I can talk about this forever. This is my special interest. I absolutely could. I think my colleagues in mental health are very, very sick of me talking about this, because I think it's such an enormous issue. Now, I'm going to be a bit devil's advocate here. Staff should be aware of the impact of their environment. However, I'm going to put the caveat here. We do know our environments are shocking. We can't always control it. So I have offered in my past roles in community mental health team as a psychologist, trauma therapy, which is really, really in-depth, hard work stuff. And I've done it in an environment where there are banging doors, there are shouting people, there are receptionists, Elaine, can you throw me? And this person's trying to do trauma therapy in an environment that is totally unsuitable. Now, I had no control over that whatsoever. They were my therapy rooms. They were all I had access to. We're very poor as the NHS. We are improving. Our buildings are getting better, but for the majority, many, many mental health teams are in the old institutions, for want of a better word. They're in the old hospitals. They were not purpose-built. They are awful rooms. They are awful walls. They have terrible doors. They have doors that slam, so the impact of the environment we know about to an extent. We can think about that more, and you can certainly raise issues more, but there are often limits to what we have available to us, and it sucks for us and for you. We know that. It's getting better. I say at some point it will get even better, hopefully. But all services should provide clear, concise written information about what they can provide. So if you are not given that, you can ask for it. We should all have information leaflets. We should all be able to give you that. This is what we're talking about. This is what this means. This is who these professionals are. Some trusts are better than others. So in my last trust, I put together like a list of these are all the acronyms you will come across. These are all the mental health professionals and what they do. Because actually, I will throw out a term, OT, SALT, psychologist. What's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? People don't always know. So you can ask that stuff, and some trusts will have that information written down. If they don't, they should. So if you do get to see a psychological therapist, this is what they should provide you. And if they don't, you can challenge them. A clear and concise rationale for the treatment that they are suggesting. So if you come to see me and I say, I think you need cognitive analytic therapy, I should then tell you, A, what that is, and B, why I think that you need that and what the evidence for my suggestion is. So sometimes you've finally been on a waiting list for ages, you get to see a psychological therapist and they offer you something and you just go, okay, because you've waited for so long that you think, oh God, just give me anything. But actually you can ask them for what is their rationale? Why do you think this treatment will help me? They should have an actual working knowledge and an awareness of how autism and mental health issues interact. They should know that stuff. If they don't, they should have access to specialist supervision and someone who can help. Linda, is that your cat? Linda's cat has come to join us. I always love it when our pets come and join us. Sadly, my dog's too big, otherwise he would be here too. So they should tell you why they're suggesting what they suggest, and they should know how being autistic will impact that therapy. And if they don't, they should be able to get supervision and specialist help in sorting that out. They should be able to tell you how they are going to adapt that treatment for you. So I'll give you some examples. There's a trauma therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. We love an acronym in mental health. It's basically a way of processing trauma. Now we know that works for autistic people, but it takes a lot longer. Your therapist should be able to say to you, I know that this might take longer, therefore we're going to offer some more sessions. So you can ask them, how will me being an autistic person impact this therapy? They can't tell you, ask them to go away and find out. Because if they don't know that information, then you might have 6 sessions and they say it doesn't work. It's not that it doesn't work. EMDR is very effective. However, it might take longer if you're autistic, just because the way in which you process information. So this is the stuff that you can ask therapists and they should know. And if they don't, they should have a mechanism to find out. Does that come as news to anybody? Is that, did you know that already, or is that interesting? Or oh good, I'm glad it's going well so far. Thank you for the chat, that's helpful. Or does this come as a surprise to you that actually therapists should know about this stuff? This is new. Good. Okay, well, that's helpful. Great. Well, it's good to be armed with this, I think, because when you go in, you can yes, lovely, Peter Levine. Yeah. Yes, so someone is saying they had a good experience with somatic experiencing. Peter Levine is a very well-known and respected trauma therapist, and that person felt a very clear shift. However, it takes time. And someone else is saying EMDR did not work for me. That's absolutely true, but that is true for the neurotypical population as well. Some people, it just doesn't work for them. I'm not sure we know why. We don't actually know why it works, so let alone why it doesn't work. But it's pioneering, it's a very good and evidence-based therapy. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. And that's the other thing, is that neurodivergent or not, some therapies will work for you, some won't. So you can ask to change. That's the other thing. You can change if it doesn't work. So what things can you specifically ask for? So you arrive at your mental health team, you might be seeing a psychological therapist, you might be seeing a psychiatrist, you might be seeing a mental health nurse, whoever you're seeing. You can ask to sit in a certain place. Now, again, just in terms of culture, as a mental health professional in the NHS, we are taught to sit by the door. Now, the reason for this is we do get attacked, and we get attacked fairly regularly. Now, that is not to say that you are going to attack us. There's no evidence to suggest that at all. However, people, when they're very distressed and very heightened, do attack mental health professionals. And it's happened to me several times. So if you've got a room where maybe the light is coming in and they ask you to sit in a chair and you know it's going to be too bright, you can say to them, can I move and sit somewhere else? Just knowing in your mind, the reason they might be a bit reluctant to that, or they might be quite directive in where you sit, is that we are trained that we sit by the door, so that if someone gets really, really distressed, we can leave. Because the times that things have gone very wrong in the NHS is where there's been a person between you and the door, and actually that's when things can get very difficult. So again, just to let you know, because sometimes you can think, wow, this is a power dance, isn't it? Sit there. And it is, to some extent, it is an expression of power of services to tell you where to sit, and you can resist that. However, that's the context, is that it probably is just that people will always be wanting to sit by the door. So negotiate, say, okay, I understand you might need to sit by the door. How about if you sit there and I sit here? Would that be okay? And again, it is that two-way negotiation. It's fine to do that. You can ask for a specific gender of therapist. You do not have to see a male if you're female. You do not have to see a female if you're male. You don't have to see a male if you're male. You can ask for the gender of therapist that works for you. If there is a clinical reason that they think you should see a certain gender, they will tell you that. And again, you can negotiate. Oh yeah, COVID, yeah. I and my wife asked for the windows closing during my NHS diagnostic appointment. The self-professed autism expert refused, despite there being multiple loud alarms, traffic, airplane noise, and it causing me agitation and preventing concentration. This was post-COVID relaxed rules. The NHS hasn't relaxed their rules, so we are still required to, oh God, she laughed and said it was because she was going on holiday the following day. I'm so sorry. On behalf of my kind, I apologise. I'm really sorry. That's not okay. It's not okay at all. Yeah, we're very far behind in terms of relaxing COVID rules. The reason for that is because our staff have been absolutely wiped out. So we've had 60% of our workforce off sick at the same time. So we're really frightened of our staff getting sick because we can't run a service at the moment. So you will find that is a problem, but that should not be related to the clinician going on holiday. And I'm so sorry you encountered that. That is not okay. You should be able to ask for windows to be closed or opened. COVID has complicated things. We can't be as flexible as we used to be. The same around us wearing awful things like, I had to assess somebody wearing a visor and a mask, and she couldn't read any of my nonverbal cues. I couldn't read any of my nonverbal cues. I turned up like Darth Vader, like this huge thing, but it's because there's one of me and they were needing to make sure I was still working. So they did dress us all in aprons or all sorts, going into people's homes. Like, yeah, it was awful. It's getting better, but yeah. And the psychiatrist agreed they could be closed, but she was insistent. Sounds like it was more about the holiday. I'm really sorry that happened to you. Not okay. This is where I would come in and have a conversation. I will get on to how you can complain, because you can complain about that sort of thing. You can challenge a diagnosis if you think it's wrong. So if you've been in mental health services for a while and you've ended up with a diagnosis of personality disorder, of bipolar, of OCD, of whatever, and then you are diagnosed autistic and think actually this is what that was about, you can challenge the diagnosis. If the person who made the diagnosis is not in the service anymore, it's quite hard to remove it entirely, but they can write a letter that goes alongside it that says, we acknowledge that this diagnosis is no longer valid. So they sit together in your notes. So it might be difficult to take notes off entirely because we need a kind of a timeline of what has happened to you, but you can have something sit next to it. That's not very fair, but it's the same for me as it is for everybody. It's for any of us that are patients, which we all are, we will have a timeline on our notes, and actually it's very difficult to go back and change it, but you can challenge it, and you can have something put next to it that says, since this diagnosis was made, this person was diagnosed as autistic, we now understand that X, Y, and Z was in the context of autism, not in the context of bipolar, emotionally unstable personality disorder, whatever. Someone's put pre-diagnosis, I had an appointment with a psychiatrist whose glasses just reflected light in the room. I couldn't see his eyes at all. It was dreadful. Yeah, that's true. Not everybody is thoughtful about those things. Again, you can raise it, but if he can't see you, that might be tricky, but it might be about just sitting angled, so he's not sitting square on to you. I'm assuming it was a he. That was quite, see that little sexist judgment there, might have been a she consultant. So yeah, oh no, his eyes. Okay, it wasn't too much of a generalization. So you could sit at an angle, and it's that stuff about, you can ask for that. Some staff are less amenable to being flexible than others, but they should. You can ask for longer sessions, or interestingly shorter sessions. Some people cannot go for an hour, they really can't, and that's fine. You can just say, I've had enough, can we have half an hour sessions? That's also fine. Goal setting. Anyone that's been in therapy, you don't have to tell me about it now, but are often asked, what are your goals for therapy? What that says is, please cast your imagination into the future and think about an imaginary time where things are better, and tell me what that imaginary time looks like. Some autistic people can do that fine. Some really, really can't. And actually that is a level of imagination, guessing. It's so unspecific, it's so vast that actually it just shuts people down, and that can often be used as a barrier to therapy. Well, they couldn't set goals, they couldn't tell me what they wanted. You can say, give me some clear examples of what this therapy might offer me, and I'll tell you what fits. You can say, what would some common goals be in therapy? Help me with this, because this is something that I find difficult. It's not you being obstructive, it's asking for a set of thinking patterns that are very difficult for neurodivergent people, and it's in a vast space, isn't it? What would you like to be different? That's such an open question, such an abstract question. So you can say, well, you tell me, what might this therapy help me with? And that's absolutely fine. Right, this is a very busy slide. Sorry, I've made these a bit too busy. I was kind of typing and dealing with small children, so I'll try and take these one at a time. Can people let me know if you need a break? I'm just aware of time. It's 22, so I might go for another maybe 10 minutes and then we'll stop for a break. Does that fit for people? Yeah, nodding, great, okay. So make sure the room is right for you. Now, I'm really sorry to hear that someone's experience was the room wasn't right and actually it wasn't changed. That's not okay. That includes pictures. Often we fill our waiting rooms with whatever pictures we've been donated, and they're too busy, too loud, too much, or patronizing. Sounds, the number of times I've been trying to do therapy and someone's come to cut the grass, that blinking noise of that industrial lawnmower. Smells, often we clean our NHS premises with ridiculously strong smelling chemicals. Temperature, often in old NHS buildings, it's too hot, it's too cold. Some of those will be in our control, some won't. Someone's put, the open questions are very difficult and confusing and make me anxious. Yes, I didn't know that the goal question was hard for other people too. It is. Those open questions are impossible. And the other question that people constantly ask as therapists, and I'm guilty of this, is, what do you need? And the number of patients that have said to me, if I knew what I needed, I wouldn't be here. So again, you can challenge that. It's a big abstract open question, and open questions are difficult, and you can say, I find those difficult. Can you give me almost like a menu of potential answers? Someone's put, in regards to goal setting, when in a state of functional freeze, there's no future. Absolutely. Only when you move out of freeze, you can start to imagine or have some idea about how things could start to look like. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you. So again, it's harder for neurodivergent people, but it's hard for neurotypical people often as well, that it's one of the things that we often do as therapists that can be helpful or unhelpful depending on the person. So you can ask for the room to change. Again, it's interesting, that person's experience that they wrote about, that they didn't close the windows. I would hope that they would. We can do as much as we can, but we're often very limited, and our therapy rooms are often awful. So we'll do our best, but at least if you raise it, you can negotiate. Okay, well, let's try this, let's try that, and we can do the best that we can. It's really helpful to ask for information before the session. So you can ask for a picture of the therapist, you can ask for a picture of the room, that's fine. The other thing that you may not know about is YouTube often has videos about the specific therapy that you are going to have. So EMDR is on YouTube, CAT is on YouTube, CBT will be on YouTube, because they use them as training resources. So if you're interested in what will this therapy look like, you need to know that before you go in, or it's going to be too anxiety provoking and frightening. Do a YouTube trawl, have a look and see, because often there will be examples of the therapy and different therapists working, so you can see how different therapists do it. The thing I'd say is try not to make too concrete an idea, because each therapy looks a bit different depending on which therapist is doing it, but you'll get the gist from YouTube. It can be helpful to draw up a contract with the therapist and ask them to be really clear what they need from you, and you to be clear what you need from them. So at Axia, we've got a really clear policy. If you are more than 20 minutes late, we will have to rearrange you. Mental health services are often not like that. Mental health services often allude to the rules, or they sort of punish you afterwards and you don't know what you've done wrong. So you can say to them, I need you to be really clear, in order for me to get the best out of therapy, what you want me to do. So if you set me homework, when do you want it? And if you if I'm going to be late, what do you want me to do? So things like that. How do I cancel? How do I, that being really clear, and also being really clear of what you need from the therapist. So therapists often run late. This is something we know that we do. And in mental health services, it can be shocking. Now, the reason for this, I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. When I was a CMHT therapist, I would often have 7 people back to back throughout the day, one after the other, hour after hour after hour. So the only time I had to wee and make a drink was that minimal 2-minute time in between 2 patients. This is no way to run a service. It's no way to be a professional, let me tell you, but it is the reality of a lot of mental health staff. And so that little 2 minutes in between is when you run for a wee, you make a quick cup of tea, you shove a sandwich into your face. But that will eat into the time that you are meant to be being seen. So it might be that your professional comes down at 5 past, but that 5 minutes could be really unmanageable when you know you're supposed to be seen at 12 and now it's 5 past 12. So if that's going to happen, you can negotiate with that therapist about what they do. You can wait in your car and we'll phone you when we come down, so you don't have to wait in the waiting room. That's fine. We can do that. You can be walking around and actually we'll just phone you when we're coming down. We can meet you at the door, so you don't have to wait in waiting rooms. So again, it's that being able to know what you can ask for. You can ask for us to do that, and that is absolutely fine. Some services need you to fill in questionnaires. Again, these are really abstract. They often ask you what you felt for the last 2 weeks. If you ask me what I've been feeling for the last 2 weeks, I'd really struggle with that. So some of these are dense, they are abstract, they're a bit stupid, some of them, if I'm honest. So you can ask to fill them in with your therapist. You don't have to do them in the waiting room. You can say, can you do this with me? And ask them for support with filling those in. Has anyone been made to fill out those hideous questionnaires? You don't have to share it, but I think they are very difficult. And often they're done at the beginning of the session, which is the most stressful way to start a session often. So you can also ask not to fill them in at all. Some services will have them as part of their kind of contract with you that you have to do them. I'd question whether you ever have to do anything. And actually you probably could say, I don't want to do them as part of my reasonable adjustments. Yeah, it'd be up to the individual clinician, but I'd be interested in whether they still make you do them. I don't like them personally. Right. In the therapy room then, if you're having psychological therapy, you can use whatever soothing strategies work for you. Bring your fidget toys, move. It's fine to do that. If you tell the therapist, I need to rock when we're talking about this, that is absolutely fine. I've had people sit in the corner because actually they prefer the feeling of the 2 walls and rock, and I will sit next to them on the floor, cross-legged with them, and I'll do therapy like that. That is absolutely no worries at all. If you feel better moving, we can do therapy walking around the room. That is absolutely no problem whatsoever. If you need to click, or if you need to move your arms, or if you need to fiddle with something, again, all of this is fine. Do that as part of the contract thing with your therapist. That is what I need to feel okay. And any therapist worth their salt should be able to accommodate that. Now, this is a hard one. Give the therapist feedback. Tell them if something isn't working for you. That might be really hard in the moment. So it can be awkward to say to somebody. It's not helpful when you do that. But what you can do is do it in writing. You could put, just as feedback, I'm finding this really difficult. You can write to them in between the session. You could make a note of it and raise that. We're used to this. So please don't feel like the social rule is I must be polite and respect this person. It is still polite. It is still respectful to tell us that we're doing a terrible job. So you can do that. You can say, please don't say this, or please don't do this. And give them a chance to repair, because often if they know that something's upsetting for you, they will try and adjust it. I'm going to take a little pause there. Is there anything anybody wants to contribute? Because I'm aware I'm sharing a lot and I'm kind of rattling through a lot. So is there anything that anybody wants to add as I'm talking? I'm going to bring the chat up. Linda, I'm loving your cat. Okay, I'll go on to the next point, but I'll leave it up in case somebody's typing. You and your therapist can complete a written summary at the end of the session together. I often encourage therapists to do this with someone. Don't do it for them, do it with them. So what stuck out to you today? What was important to you? What things would you like to come back to next week? Co-create that, and then you've got a document that is shared between you that you have created together that reflects the therapy journey from their perspective and also from your perspective. That means you don't have to remember everything, because you won't. You'll come out of the session and go, what did we talk about? And it's a shared way of just keeping on track. So you can do that. And that is, again, that's really good practice, is to just co-create something together. So sorry, I think my child's lost her hair bubble. You may be able to hear that in the background. She'll need therapy for that when she gets older. Right, you can ask therapists to explain something if it's not clear. Now, one of the things I battle with all the time is that so many therapy worksheets are full of really dense metaphors. The amount of times we compare a feeling to a wave that you have to surf towards the beach, or we, compare something to a tree with the roots that do this and that. And actually, for some autistic people, that's fine. Metaphor works fine. For others, they're thinking, what are you talking about? So I use the idiom of, if you're a hammer, everything is a nail. And I saw, luckily, something go across the person's face. And I'm like, do you know what I mean by that? And they're like, no idea at all. And actually, that was my mistake. Using idiom and dense metaphor is not helpful. So if those worksheets that you're given are full of things that don't mean anything to you, particularly in DBT, so that's dialectical behaviour therapy. Dialectical behaviour therapy is almost entirely based on metaphors. So you can ask for those to be changed to much more concrete examples if that doesn't work for you. You can ask for someone to come with you. So that is the other thing. You can ask for someone to come with you into the therapy. Often therapists will want you to come alone, but actually there's no evidence that I'm aware of that is more effective. So it's just a tradition that we have. You can ask for someone to come with you. It is fine. I've done therapy with other people in the room and it's been very effective. Often they'll try and make you work towards coming alone, but you can challenge that if you know that's going to be unmanageable for you. And if it's going wrong, you can make a complaint. So we all have access to PALS, which is the Patient Advice and Liaison Service. As a mental health service, we are covered by PALS. You can ask for help with a complaint. Now, approach your therapist first if you can, or your mental health team first if you can. But if you can't and you feel like it's too tricky, go straight to PALS, and that's absolutely fine. And PALS will help you, and they'll do the liaising with you. So I often am talking to PALS who come to me and say, I've had a patient, they're saying this, and this isn't working for them. And I'll say, oh, great, okay, thank you for letting me know. We'll do this, and this. And then I have to give PALS an answer. I have to formally reply to what the issue is, and they then go back to the patient. So that is a good port of call for you. I'm aware I've been talking a long time. Should we have a break? I'm just going to scroll upwards. Lovely Evie and Chloe. How long do we normally break for?
Yeah, usually sort of 10 minutes. So if we came back, what are we on now? If we came back at 1, would that suit everybody?
Fine with me? Yep,
Yeah.
That's no worries at all. Lovely.
Perfect.
Great. I will stop the share and I will see you all back here. Oh, it's nice to see everybody. I did get you as a little thumbnail, so here you all are. So I will see you back here at 1 o'clock. We'll go and make a cup of tea. See you shortly.
Hello, is everybody back?
Yeah, we can see that all right.
Perfect, great.
Well done, everyone. Right, hang on a second. Let's just see what's in the chat. Oh, yes, fine, great. Okay, I'll keep going then. Other things. Now, I think this is a really important point, right? So it's not your responsibility to educate your therapist. That is a really important thing for you to know. As a person, anybody with a difference or anybody with a particular way of seeing the world or anybody in general should not have to educate their therapist about what that means. You shouldn't have to tell your therapist about what autism is. However, if you have the energy and you want to, you can. So that's the other thing. If they say something, if they use a misconception, so how many members of the public, mental health professionals included, have misnomers, stereotypes in their mind that are unhelpful. If you have the energy and you want to challenge that, you can. You can challenge language, you can challenge preconceptions, you can challenge, but you don't have to. So again, it's not your responsibility to educate your therapist on what autism is. But you can say, oh, well, for me, it looks like this, or for me, this is helpful, or this is unhelpful. You can do that if you want to. Right, a word on medication. I've kind of spoken about this a little bit. Now, we know that for some people who are neurodivergent, that's right across the board, so ADHD is the same. Some medications can cause side effects that are intolerable, and that can be amplified if you have sensory sensitivities. It can be difficult to put into words what side effects you're experiencing. Some people talk about just feeling wrong, so some of those are very difficult. They're quite abstract, that you just feel a bit zoned out or you just feel a bit wrong, so they can be tricky to communicate, and the side effect profile can be worse. So please don't feel like you are being difficult. We do know that that's true, and you can ask for somebody with skills and experiences in prescribing medication for autistic people. That may or may not be forthcoming. Some services have people who are really good at this, and they know they've got a range of skills, they've done extra training, they are good at that. Some services do not have access to that. If they don't, then whoever it is that's prescribing your medication should ask for support. They should ask from their colleagues and their regional group of doctors for specialist supervision or some support around this. And if at worst comes to worst, they should be able to do the research themselves and actually look at what the evidence is for different types of medication for people who are neurodivergent. So just a word, if you've been through 15 different antidepressants and you're still feeling awful, or you're getting a ringing in your ears, or you feel like your skin is crawling, you're not alone. Actually, we know that that is the case, that many neurodivergent people find them. I feel like I'm doing nothing else. So I'm just reading a comment here, constantly having to explain myself, but it's exhausting. And when you come across a person who's acknowledging you as a human being, treating you like an equal, this is such a relief. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Yeah. And I would hope that most therapists, would be able to do that and be curious, because even, all neurotypical people aren't the same either. And actually, we are constantly being curious about what's different and what's the same. This is my experience. How is this different or the same to yours? But that should not it should not develop into you then also having to explain this is what autism is. That is the role of the trainers in their department. And if they haven't had the training, they need to go on the training. It is not your responsibility to explain, because like you say, it's exhausting. Right. A word to the future. This is the good news. I come with good news. I never get to do that, but I do today. So we have some money for the first time in my life, I think. Maybe in the 90s. I think when Labour was around, we had a bit of money. But for the first time in my living memory, we have serious money. So £360 million has been given over to mental health services from what it's part of the NHS long-term plan, and it forms what we call the community mental health framework. So I'll explain a little bit about this because it will impact you for the better. Some areas will do this better than others. Some areas are flying with this, some areas are not. But I'll tell you what it is. So in the old days, we had a pot of money and we had to keep that within the NHS, and it was very much about funding services as they are. So this is the money you have for nurses, this is the money you have for psychology, this is the money you have for, I don't know, building maintenance. And we had these little tiny annoying pots of money that had to be spent. So at the end of the year, if you had money left in your, I don't know, say equipment budget, you just spend it, right? So we would end up with these, a trampoline would appear in the corner of the office, or a beanbag would appear because we had to spend our equipment money. Now, the problem with that is actually that money could have been used on staffing. It was a really inefficient way of doing budgeting. It was like, this is allocated for this, and we don't need a trampoline. What we need is a nurse. So the community mental health framework, what it's doing is it's extending out what we can spend our money on. So it's not just within the NHS. So for the first time ever, we are now able to give money to what we call our third sector providers. So this is your charities. These are your specific services, like I say, like women's aid, like rape crisis centres, like young people, children's projects, all of this stuff, who have been in our community doing great work for a long time, but we've never been able to pay them. So for the first time, we now as an NHS service can give that money to charities to bridge the gap between us as a standalone mental health service who are only geared to offer treatment for what we consider to be a severe and enduring mental health issue, which I know is very triggering, and that brings up a lot of issues. We can now give money to people who do much more healthy stuff. So social prescribing, that is giving you a prescription to go to the gym if you want to. That is signposting you to other services. That is going out with you and going to a cafe, or if you've always wanted to try boating, but you're really scared to do that, actually, there are services that will do that with you now. It's that much more out in the community where people are, not in big, awful, old red brick buildings where you get a horrible mental health label. So it's very positive. It's significant money. So in my patch, we've got £4 million, which is, it's not loads, but it's some. And it's the most money we've had for a long time. And on top of that, we've also got what's called COVID uplift money. So we've been given £21 million across the country for the influx of patients that we're seeing as a result of COVID. So there is money around. And in my service, what that's looking like is mental health workers in the GPs. So when you go to your GP, rather than being referred to a mental health team, there will be a professional, mental health professional in the GP surgery that can see you actually there and will assess you and say, oh, I think this service would be useful, or that service, or they might offer you some sessions themselves. So that is very different. And it means the GPs can get consultation for the first time ever, rather than having to ring us in the mental health system. They can actually have someone in the office next to them. They can pop next door and say, I'm just going to go and talk about this with Valerie, and they can go next door and have that consultation. So that is one thing that's different. We will have more services for people, so there will be a focus for us on personality disorder, eating disorders, and chronic long-term health conditions. So there'll be more practitioners around doing that work. There will be more befrienders and peer mentors, so other people who have had mental health issues or still have mental health issues, supporting you to find your way. So I know there's been several people saying they found their own way. Actually, you could be employed as a peer supporter to help others find their own way as well. It doesn't always have to come from mental health professionals. Again, it's that power imbalance, isn't it? It's like us the wise, and that's just not true. We know that we're all human beings. We all have mental health and ill health, and actually sometimes just talking to someone who knows what it's like is far more powerful than talking to some person in an office giving you unhelpful advice. So actually, for the first time, we are going to be able to fund that, which is radical and great for us. Some people are becoming even more radical. They're going to break down the barriers between primary and secondary care. So we've done that in our service. It's just one mental health service now to give people less hoops to jump through. Again, that will look different in each different area. But there should be, and you should see, a significant improvement. It won't be perfect, but it will be better in your local mental health services, because they will have money. And they will be working more with GPs and people on the ground to actually implement this. As I say, every plan looks different, but it's all having to go centrally to be signed off. We've also employed a family therapist. Oh my God, 2 family therapists, which I'm thrilled about, because actually a lot of the issues, as we know, are not in the person. It's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what's happened to you. If something has happened to you, it's likely that it's happened in a family, or that a family is impacted by it, and therefore working with a family rather than you is much better, because it means that the change is lasting, that we can affect change across an entire system rather than just with one person. So these are good developments. What it will look like in practice will be interesting. We'll see over the next 3 years. So this is year 1, then there'll be year 2 and year 3, and there's different pots of money being released as we go along. We're also looking at putting in better services for addiction. So people who are struggling with alcohol use and drug use, there should be money in most pots to be able to improve those services. So a bit of good news. I hope. But I'm going to stop sharing now, and that's my kind of presentation over, and just open up a discussion basically for people to ask or contribute or say whatever it is they want to say. I'm very flexible. Again, be careful that you're happy to share whatever it is that you share. But yeah, I'll open the floor up to you. Maybe you need to lie down after all that information, I'm aware of. That's quite a lot. Right, I've got something in the chat. So that's why there were so many beanbags in the 90s. Yes, there was an enormous amount of beanbags in the 90s. So it was a very inefficient way of managing budgets, but we're a very unwieldy machine. Linda, I'm wondering what random things you guys bought at the end of the tax year. Can you remember anything ridiculous that appeared in your department in April? Oh, you're on mute. Hang on. Can we unmute you? There we are.
Okay, paper clips.
Yeah.
Coloured paper clips, because we were only allowed to buy silver ones, and then when there was an excess of money, we bought coloured ones.
Yeah, well, that's going to radically change people's mental well-being, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm not joking. It genuinely was what we used to do when we had a surplus budget, which a really inefficient way of running a service, but
very inefficient.
You can see why, can't you? That you have this little pot
yes.
and this little pot, but that's luckily not so stringent anymore. That's changing. So no more coloured paper clips for you. Silver ones only.
Yeah.
I've got another one in the chat. The things you mentioned earlier regarding reasonable adjustments. Do you want to add to that? I feel like that's half a. And how you ask for written communication. Yeah. Do you mean kind of examples about how you do that? Does this extend to other areas? Good question. Yes, it should extend to physical health services as well. Yes, it should. The PIP application process is often an absolute nightmare, but yes, you should be able to ask for clear written communication, and you should be able to ask for reasonable adjustments. I'm not sure how forthcoming that is. The Department of Social Services is different to us. As the NHS, we can make some changes that the Department of Work and Pensions don't seem to make, and they do often force people to come face to face, and we fight that a lot. If you are under a service or you do have a particularly good GP, they can also write letters of support. I write endless letters of support saying this is not appropriate, no, this person can't do this, no, you cannot make them do this, no, this is not okay. They tend not to take it from the person themselves. Just anecdotally, I'm sorry that's the case, it's crap, but if you have a professional who is in your life that will put that on paper, that tends to make it better. And as I say, I spend my life rattling off letters to the DSS and going to appeals and all sorts of stuff because the PIP application process, again, it's unfathomable, it's very difficult, it's extremely stressful, and yeah, if you do have a GP that's willing to put that in writing, they might be able to help, but they can't always. Someone's put, I wish there were drop-in centres locally. It would be so good to be able to go for a cuppa among autistic adults and to feel accepted and okay. Yes, absolutely, I agree with you. That will not be covered by the Community Mental Health Framework money because it is mainly around mental health. However, there will be mental wellbeing drop-in centres increasingly in your area. So there will be sessions at GPs, or just Mind often run these as well, and we will be able to fund Mind to do this, which is just drop-ins. So cup of tea and a bit of cake, they often have cake, and just come and have a cup of tea and hang out with people. And often, like I say, there will be a collection of neurodivergent people there, because neurodivergent people are more likely to feel anxious and depressed, so they do end up coming to drop-ins and things like this more often. But I agree with you, some areas have them and some don't, and when they do have them, it is great, and it would be much better if they were more available. Can you have both autism and a personality disorder? Yes, you can. There are subtle differences. So for those geeks who really love research like I do, the diagnostic overlap is about 73%. So about 3/4 of what we're talking about is the same, but there's some differences on either side. There's some things that make it autism and there's some things that make it a personality disorder. It is possible to have both, but it is important to tease apart whether this is a personality disorder or whether this is autism, because if you get misdiagnosed, so if you are diagnosed as having personality disorder, but in actual fact you are autistic, you will go down a line of treatment that will not be helpful for you, because you will end up in a program, like I say, like dialectical behavior therapy, which is full of metaphor and images of surfing and other impenetrable and annoying things about trees and breathing and various other bits. So it's important to get that right. So if you feel in your heart of hearts, I think this is not just this, or I think this is both, I would seek that diagnostic clarity, because it will affect what services you are offered and how effective they are. Is there a template for written communication as reasonable adjustments? As time and time again, I'm refused and labelled difficult, and someone put that would be good. I don't know, but I believe, Evie and Chloe, that is something we might want to do potentially. That could be something in our reasonable adjustments, that we could potentially put something, if we haven't already, about reasonable adjustments that when accessing services. Do we have that already?
We've got one for kind of higher education in the workplace and stuff, and with interviews and universities and stuff, and some guidance there, but definitely something I think we should do with this, shouldn't we?
Yeah, it's not in the document at the moment, but definitely something that we can look at and add. Yeah,
I would be more than happy to do that with you. We could sit together and think about, because it's not just mental health services, it's service provision in general. If you go to a physical health consultation and somebody prattles at you for half an hour and gives you a load of acronyms, you may walk away none the wiser, or you have to sit in a busy waiting room, so you're so distressed by the time you have the physical examination, actually your blood pressure is 170 over 200 or whatever. So actually that we can think about putting something together. These are commonly what people need to access services, and having clear written communication would be important. And the being labelled difficult is very important. That's what I'm alluding to when I say your behaviour will be misinterpreted. What I mean is your behaviour will be interpreted as difficult, because that is what happens, and then you will get the label of difficult patient, and that is not helpful. And something that is absolutely reasonable to ask, like, can you just write things down, can be experienced as difficult in a service that is defensive. And we are defensive. I know that we are, and for good reason. As I say, we are often under attack. We're often sued. We have it's not plain sailing for the mental health professionals either, but that's not an excuse. And actually, we shouldn't be being so defensive, but we are. So yeah, for professional services, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can do that. We'll put something together of these are common reasonable adjustments that people need, and that could be used for PIP applications, it could be used for physical and mental health, it could be used for any professional sort of services that you're accessing. Will you guys make a note of that, because I'll forget it?
Yeah.
Bit sleep deprived. I've got a baby, she's 19 weeks old, and I'm absolutely completely forget my own name a lot of the time, so if you remind me, we'll do that. My doctor's notes say they won't tolerate me, and I've instructed their team not to tolerate me either. I wonder what that means. Don't tolerate you. What does that mean? Do you know what that means? Or is that just a phrase that they've used, that you're difficult? Well, I'm pretty sure that the system that you're in is also probably quite difficult, if that's what they're labeling you. I mean, I think it's something about how you raise your concerns. So as I say, one of the things you can do is you can approach PALS and say to PALS, so that's the Patient Advice and Liaison Service, I know that I struggle to raise my queries or concerns in a way that can be heard by professionals. Can you help me? Because it might be that they think you're shouting or they think you're being aggressive, and actually you're not, you're just trying to communicate, but the way in which you do that, they're misinterpreting it if they don't understand that you're autistic, or also if they're being defensive, or there can be lots of reasons these things happen. But getting PALS to liaise for you can be really powerful and useful. Actually, that's their job, is to negotiate between the team and you, so you don't have to approach them personally. You can go to PALS and see if PALS will advocate for you, so it's worth doing that if you get stuck. I don't know if PALS covers GP surgeries, actually. I'll check that with the PALS. Do you know that off the top of your head, Linda? Do PALS cover GPs, or is it only secondary mental health systems?
I don't know. I know that my experience of PALS in like an NHS trust has been very good. But I don't know about GPs. It might be you'd have to go more serious to like General Medical Council or something like that, or CQC.
Yeah, that could happen. I wonder as well about the National Autistic Society, if they have any sort of liaison function, whether they could offer anything. I'll have a think about that. Go on.
One of the things they do, the NAS help with like the health passport things. So they've got the format. I think it looks a bit like it's been designed for people with a learning disability. However, I think it can be adapted and sort of so that you could actually give it to somebody, so you don't have to say anything. This is the way I communicate. These are my sensory sensitivities. These are the challenges. And I think if that's all done in advance, particularly for physical health problems, as you said, Anna, that would be a really good way. But I'm sure we can adapt that and make that more. The other thing, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to go and have my nails done. I know this is pathetic, but my dyspraxia has let me down. I got my timings wrong, so I'm going to have to go. But could I just put in a bit of a plug about our post-diagnostic support group coming back to real life in August, and so that people then will be able to see us in reality. And at the moment, our senior management team meetings, we're looking a lot more into how we can help people with PIP. We have been a bit inundated in the past, but we're thinking the post-diagnostic support group might be a way we could have some standard letters, some standard, what we used to do in the past, and then I will go and not dominate, is we used to have a list of all the post-diagnostic support groups for the year and give those to people as appointments that they needed to attend, so they could show them to employers and things like that, and we give them time off to come to the group. And often queries around PIP and stuff like that, we could actually resolve after the main presentation at the group. So a bit of hope there that maybe we could do a bit more to help people with PIP.
That sounds great. I think it's really needed. Thank you, Linda. I think that's really necessary.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry about that.
Someone's just asked Linda, could it be dual online and in person? So just as you move forward, dual online and in person.
Evie can explain that.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, brilliant.
So
you just put that, sorry.
It'll be a sort of hybrid model. So it'll continue to be streamed as it is, but also we will all be in a room together for people who want to attend that way. But if you want to continue virtually, you can do. So there's the option for both.
Okay. Ellie has very helpfully Googled. They have looked and found can complain to the Commissioner of the Service, either NHS England or the Area Clinical Commissioning Group. So that is the CCG, which is what Linda suggested. And in general, NHS England commissions most primary care services, such as GP and dental services. CCGs do oversee the commissioning of secondary care, such as hospital care and some community services. So you could go directly to your CCG. The thing I would say, again, being devil's advocate, is they will experience that as massively threatening. So if you go to the CCG, who are the people who hold the money for the services, the services will see that as massively threatening. So you might get a really positive response, you might get things done, but you might get that kind of defensive pushback. And so this thing about not being tolerated, being difficult, that is not to say don't do it, but just do it knowing that that will be perceived as going to the head teacher. They're the big guns, and so that will be very frightening for services if they get communication from a CCG to say that they've had a complaint from patients. Thank you, Ellie, for doing that. So Pal, somebody's put wow, this is really something, not tolerate you. To me, this is exactly what would cause stress because I don't feel heard in my needs. Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. And someone's put, yeah, we have to mask. Yes, and that is true. There is an expectation of behaving in a particular way, and anything other than that can be perceived as aggressive. Again, I think this is where things are changing. So if you imagine the services that you have interacted with over the last 10, 15, 20 years have had no training on autism at all. So if you come in and state in a very blunt and kind of clear way what they're doing wrong, they might, if they didn't understand, experience that or perceive that as being aggressive. That's not what it is, but that is what they might perceive. Now they understand better because most trusts have rolled out their training program. Actually, this is not about, you know, that this person is going to punch you. This person is just making their needs known in a very clear way. I would hope that would get better. If it doesn't, then again, having someone to advocate and be with you and for you can be really useful. This is not about you being threatening. This is not about you being aggressive. This is, or being, you know, needing tolerating. This is about you struggling to get your needs met in a system that is set up for neurotypical people. So it's fine to challenge that. Somebody has put that they're really scared of complaining to PALS because last time you was dropped on ethical grounds. I mean, that's outrageous, and received no more medical help for 15 years. Now I'm back in services again, but getting nowhere, and I've been advised to contact PALS, but I'm terrified I'll be punished for it again. Any advice, please? My hope would be that it's improved in the last 15 years and that you will not have the same experience again. I can't promise that, but I think the knowledge in general across the board about autism, about making reasonable adjustments has improved. I would hope that PALS would be useful, particularly if you let PALS know, I am an autistic person, you know, I need this, this, and this. I need things in writing. I need things to be clear. This is what I'm struggling with. These are the reasonable adjustments that I require. I would hope that they would be able to, in some ways, that they would be able to then respond in a helpful manner. So I think it's worth doing it again. You've got nothing to lose. If you're getting nowhere anyway, you've got nothing to lose. PALS do advocate, they do come to us, they do challenge us. They've got quite a lot of teeth. They are useful. So if PALS comes to me and says, what did you do this for? I have to answer them. I've got a specific time frame in which I have to answer. So they are useful. They do have bite, they do have teeth, and they do, you know, they can get things done. So I would go back to them again. And again, if you get nowhere, you can go to the CCG. You can also go to your MP, is the other thing. We often have MPs getting involved. Again, we tend to react with much terror. If it's the head teacher and, you know, the assistant head, the equivalent of, if it's, you know, the CCG and an MP, we will tend to act and we'll jump because we're quite nervous about that. But you might get some quite defensive practice. Let's have a look. Could local health watch be helpful? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what your local provision would be, but yes, I mean, anything that you could do to get some support in advocating for yourselves, absolutely. And we will provide you, as I say, with what some typical reasonable adjustments might be. Anything else that people want to ask? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm being a devil's advocate here. It's hard, isn't it? Because I want to give you an idea about how things are, but this is not me saying it's how they should be. We've got a long way to go, and we do know that. We know that we are failing at the moment, and we know that there's a lot of progress that needs to be made. I guess I'm trying to be realistic and give you a snapshot of how things are, not how they should be. Anything else that anyone wants to add or ask? A lot to think about. One thing we'll take from this then is we'll work together. Evie and Chloe will come up with some reasonable adjustments for accessing services that will be wide enough to include mental health services. So for the person who was going to PALS, if we could do this pretty quickly, we could turn it around quite rapidly. You could take that with you and show that to PALS and say, look, this is the reasonable adjustments that are advised. I feel like I'm not getting this from this service. Can you help me? And that might be a useful template for you to take.
Yeah, and with this being, I suppose, distribution wise, with this, it's not a personalized document. So this is something that we can just upload to our website, and anybody, any of you or other people who want to access that can do. It's nothing sort of specific in there. Just sort of a template guide that anybody can use, so we can put that online.
And just personally, I'm really sad. Yeah, we will send a notification, yeah, when it's available. Yeah, we can do that. I'm really sad to hear people's experiences. I'm not surprised. I have seen this day in, day out for many years now. It's very difficult. What's interesting is the research that's done with staff suggests it's as frustrating. Can you signpost research papers, etc., which prescribers can look at re-prescribing for autistic people? The best place for them to go would be the Royal College of Psychiatry. So that's their governing body. If you're seeing a psychiatrist, they would be able to signpost what the latest, most relevant research is. I'm not a prescriber. I know there is lots of research out there. There was one done recently in America, various other bits and pieces. But if you are being prescribed psychotropic medication, so medication for mental health, and you feel that it's not helpful, you can ask your prescriber to ask their colleagues at the Royal College of Psychiatry for advice about what to read and about where to go, because it'll be different for each medication, different for each condition. So yeah, I'm sad to hear these experiences, but I am aware that this is what happens, and I am hopeful that things are moving forward. It feels like things are inching forward in my trust, definitely. I feel like people know where to go now. They know that they need to make reasonable adjustments. They have a good working knowledge of what autism is, which is basic, but at least it's a start. I feel like we're getting somewhere in terms of our environments. We're becoming more aware of sensory nature of our environments. Where we struggle, I think, is getting money for new premises, because our buildings are old and awful, and freezing often. But I think it's positive overall. I think this is the best time that we've seen in terms of finance and provision, so fingers crossed.
Anna, just a quick one.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, do you get many people that you see that do ask for reasonable adjustments, or do you think they're maybe not aware that they can?
No, never ever had anybody come to our service that I'm aware of and say, I am autistic, these are the reasonable adjustments I require. What tends to happen is the staff go, oh God, this person's autistic, this treatment isn't working, what do we do? Then they come to me and go, what do we do? And I go, what reasonable adjustments have you made? And they go, what? And I go, those things that we have to make by law, which ones of those have you done? And they go, and then we sit down and think about it, and we think about what reasonable adjustments the person might want. They usually meet with their care coordinator, who will suggest things. But no, I don't think people feel empowered. I'd be interested in whether you all do feel empowered enough to say to services, this is my legal right, this is what I need. I think people often come and don't feel empowered to speak out, and don't feel like they'll be listened to, or feel afraid. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, that somebody who approached PALS 15 years ago got kicked out of services, and this is the experience of people, that if you rock the boat, you will have services denied to you, and that is horrific, but it's true. And it goes right back to the old days. If you speak to anybody who had the experience of being in a mental health hospital in the 70s, 80s, often there was terrible recrimination for complaining, or asking, or there is a history of abuse in mental health services, and we know that. So I think that hangs over. That is part of the context in which people approach us, as they know, don't offend, don't upset the mental health team, because you won't get what you need. However, like I say, I feel like things are changing enough that you can feel hopefully suitably confident to say, this is me, I am an autistic person, however you want to phrase that, whatever fits for you, and these are the things I need to access your services. I feel like that you should be able to do that, and that should be received well.
Yeah.
Any thoughts people want to add before we go? It's been lovely to meet with you all, and lovely to share some of this. I'm aware it's not the nicest topic in the world, and it feels like a lot of you have had some very negative experiences, so I'm sorry to bring those up, but hopefully by having this dialogue, we're at least starting something. Gave you palpitations? Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I felt like that might happen. It's difficult to talk about this stuff without bringing that. One of the reasons you don't want to complain. Yeah. And I think we can't negate the fact that there is power. Mental health systems have power, and they know that. Thank you. I hope my kids get better soon as well. It's like it's pretty grim in here at times, but they're getting there. But yes, there is often a power imbalance, and again, we're dealing with that. I think we are starting to critically reflect on our power and the way we use our power, and that is increasingly happening. It's interesting. I have my job, so my trust pay me a consultant psychologist's wage to challenge them, and I sit in big level high meetings and challenge their practice and say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? And I advocate often for patients. I will explore, why are we doing this? Why are we putting this person in hospital? What's this about? What's the dynamic? So that's a commitment there from my service, at least, to critically evaluate what it's doing, is that they pay me to do that. So I am often the voice of reflection and asking, but why are we doing this? What's this really about? So at least that's happening. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do it well as I can, and I'm not always perfect either, and I get caught up in dynamics too, but I think increasingly, like I say, as services, we are aware of one thing you might want to look at is the power threat meaning framework. If you are in services, this is a different way of understanding mental health, and it comes from psychology. It's a lot being critical of the kind of psychiatric model of diagnosis. So if you are interested in deconstructing diagnosis and, you know, in a kind of a slightly more critical way of understanding mental health difficulties, the power threat meaning framework might be quite meaningful for you. And most mental health professionals will have some idea about what that is. So that might be some interesting reading moving forward. Particularly, Evie and Chloe, if you've not come across this, I would absolutely suggest that you have a look at this, because, you know, as people who will be qualifying as clinical psychologists, this is a very powerful movement in our kind of profession at the moment. So definitely worth a look.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely will.
The woman who started this used to really scare the psychiatrists because she used to bash them publicly, really, really publicly. And oh, see, Ellie, you are outstanding. Thank you. Yeah, so that's definitely worth looking at that. They've definitely simmered down a little bit, actually. They're not as radical as they used to be, but yeah, they used to be real public psychiatry bashing, which has kind of simmered down a little bit. I think they offended some people, but yeah, certainly that is something for you guys to take a look at. Anything else before we go? Ellie, thank you for tech support. I don't know how many of you know, but they definitely organised my whole life. So so many times like, Ellie, I can't make the computer work. So thank you for doing that again. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to meet you all, and thank you so much. I hope you have much better access to service moving forward.
Yeah, I think if I've got no more comments then, I just want to say a massive thank you to you, Anna. It's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. And everyone for sharing all your experiences. It's been really nice and interactive. So thank you for that. Our next session will be, I think it's the 25th of May.
25th of May.
If that's a Wednesday.
Yeah.
And that will be virtual, and then obviously more information to come close to the time. But yeah, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, guys. See you soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.